Hi, everybody. Welcome back, many of you. Welcome to the first time to many of you. My name is Ryan Grover. I'm the curator. I'm the Sewell C. Biggs Curator of American Art here at the Biggs. And I'm the person that was responsible for putting this exhibition together. I have to say, though, this was a particularly fun and easy exhibition to do, and one that anyone can do, because everything that you see here came from the Library of Congress. All the images that we were able to bring into this exhibition, and I'm going to be showing you about 24 of them today. All of these images were available on the Library of Congress's website. And so we were able to search out images by Toni Frissell, and we were able to download them and then print them. We just have to give credit to the Library of Congress and make sure that we put their identification numbers of the individual images on the labels. And so you too can do this. I should also say that we have downloaded and we've printed out a number of photographs from the Library of Congress's collection, but this is by no means all of them. There are lots and lots and lots of pictures. Toni Frissell's photographs are definitely not the only visual art form that is on the Library of Congress website, and they are remarkably good about making sure that people have access to these things. Always check copyright if you're going to be using it, and especially if you're going to sell it. So don't sell it, but share these images because there really aren't a lot of photographs of the Tuskegee Airmen during World War II. There's actually a lot more of them after the year 2007. So if you get a chance, you should just jump on that and take a look at it and share them and sort of send them out and print them up as Christmas cards. I don't know. So you know about the Biggs, you know about me, and we're starting on this exhibition. I'm a little out of sorts. I've been painting today. I grew out a beard. I feel like I look fuzzy and completely covered in paint, so I apologize for my appearance. You'll just have to bear with me. I feel like a mountain man of the north. Maybe my hair is too long, turning into a hippie. But Toni Frissell. So what can I say about Toni Frissell? She was the photographer of this work. And Toni Frissell started off her career as a fashion photographer. She worked principally, before World War II, she worked principally for Vogue, but for other fashion houses or fashion magazines as well. She worked in a lot of advertising. And she is known for using a particular, like a mild fisheye lens on her fashion models that elongated the form. So it would create these extra long sort of shapes within the human body, which is really, really interesting. So if you look up some of her fashion photography online, there's a lot of that you can see. You see these just almost impossibly long sort of female figures. She was also one of the first fashion photographers to shoot women in bathing suits, if you can imagine the scandal of that experience. So yeah, kind of a wild lady. We like her quite a bit. So Toni Frissell, before the war, very much into fashion. After the war, she's still something of a correspondent. She never really goes back to fashion in the same way, but she is tapped to do a lot of portraiture. And so there are remarkable portraits of Winston Churchill, sitting US presidents, and CEOs, men of business, just super, super important individuals. And she would come and photograph them for major periodicals. During the war, though, she volunteered. So she stopped working professionally. She started working in volunteerism. And at first, she was assigned to record the activities of the Red Cross. And then that expanded to be able to also start working on photographing images of women's initiatives, sort of like women's initiatives during the war. And so she was one of only 3 female war correspondents, so 3 photojournalists that were female in a very male-dominated sort of environment. And she had just really, really, she had just terrific access, access that a lot of photographers during the war didn't necessarily have. So one of the things that, so we're looking at a photograph of Toni Frissell from the Library of Congress's collection. She's there with a bunch of kids. It looks like she's in France, maybe Italy. And this is supposedly taken sometime around, I think, 1943, 1944. And so Toni Frissell, after a while, started doing work specifically for, let me get this right, the Office of War Information. World War II was one of these sort of interesting moments in American media history because the US government created a very tight hold on the marketing images, the way that the war was being covered from the American perspective. And so there was this enormous war effort behind the success of World War II, and it was dominated. I mean, these the images of the war effort were provided through the photojournalists that were all over Europe and other parts of the world. And so these individuals would be placed on assignment, and they would come to try and bring together photographs that would initiate a greater sort of civic bond to the activities that were taking place. And so what we find is that Toni Frissell was placed in with groups that she was able to capture, and then the images that she captured would then be turned into posters. They would be turned into short films. They would be added to sort of like popular literature about war correspondence and sort of like the sort of covering the things that were happening during the war. But it was really to sort of try and give our military presence all over the world, to try and give it a very, very positive spin. People wanted to feel like this was right, and the war correspondents were out there to try and create that storyline. She was assigned to actually photograph the Tuskegee Airmen just a couple of weeks before their final assignment of World War II, really very much at the end of the hostilities that or just before the end of the war in Europe. And so it's interesting that we're sort of seeing this at the very sort of tail end of the Tuskegee influence within the war. So, you know, a little bit about Frissell, and I should point out over my shoulder here, you're probably seeing this photograph of my friend John. So she also, Toni Frissell had terrific access. She seemed to have grown up in a pretty sort of swing part of the world herself. I mean, she's from New York originally, but she came from a pretty affluent background. So she had terrific access to other individuals. I think that she was one of the photographers that was chosen to cover the Kennedy and Bouvier, so Jackie O, wedding when they were first married in the 1950s. Before he was president, of course. And so this is one of the photographs that we see from that time period. Before I really launch into the Tuskegee Airmen, though, I want to talk a little bit about the collection itself that Toni Frissell. So it looks like Toni Frissell gave to the Library of Congress a great number of her own prints. So these are printed objects out of basically her own archive, or maybe they were just sort of stashed in the top drawer of a desk, or I'm not exactly sure what the situation is. But these things are images that had come directly from the photographer. There is a range of quality basically to these photographs. Sometimes the things that were printed were not printed with the highest resolution. Sometimes the photographs that are that were given to the Library of Congress have some condition issues to them. We have, so when I was picking out images for this show, I tried very hard to find images that were sharp and that they were relatively in focus. As often as I possibly could, but I also made the conscious decision that I was not going to touch up photographs. So what we are seeing here, we had printed from digital scans, larger photographs. So ours are like 16 by 20. We had printed digital scans of Toni Frissell's original photographs. So there are blemishes on the surface of these images. There are some sort of like dust pieces and stuff like that. There are scratches sometimes on the surfaces that come through. We've left them. I tried to be as pure in that capacity as I could, because I wanted it to be a little, I thought about it and I thought ultimately I just wanted it to be evocative of those materials, those actual materials at the Library of Congress. That said, and I think I sort of mentioned this before, there are not a huge number of images of the Tuskegee Airmen. So this cache of materials that Toni Frissell have produced is really sort of a, it's just such a treasure. And I feel like a lot of individuals have used it over the years. So you're gonna see images that are definitely very recognizable, and people that have been over the years identified. So we will begin to move on. I'm gonna walk this way. What do you think of this purple color on the walls? It's great, isn't it? Is this a good angle? Yeah. So the first set of 3 images are the pilots, of course. We have to sort of deal with the pilots. We have to sort of like jump into the pilots because, of course, everybody thinks about the pilots when they first think about the Tuskegee Airmen. The Tuskegee Airmen are absolutely the 900 some pilots that trained to fly at the Tuskegee Air Force, or excuse me, at the Tuskegee Airfield in Alabama from 1941 to 1945. However, and one of the things that we really wanted to emphasize with this exhibition is that it's not just the pilots, it's also the communication specialists, it's the mechanics, it's the logistic folks, it's the individuals that are working behind the scenes, those individuals that are just sort of working in supply chain, those individuals that are working at administrative capacities. All of these are Tuskegee Airmen, and they all came through the same range of training. They were all trained in aviation, in militarized aviation from 1941 to 1945 at the Tuskegee Airfield, as well as the Morton Airfield. Thank you. So it turns out that these were the first African-American pilots in the US military history. And this is significant for a number of reasons, because there were only a few, because this is still segregation, this is still American segregation, this is still military segregation, and there were only a few civilian centers for learning how to be a pilot open to African Americans anywhere within the country. Many of them are associated with historically Black colleges, so Black colleges that were segregated colleges of the 1930s, 1940s. 5 Black colleges in America, I just learned this today, 5 Black colleges in America had civilian training programs for pilots. And those, at the outset of the war, as the Tuskegee program, the Tuskegee experiment was first being sort of unveiled, they were feeders for the Tuskegee program. One of those programs was here in Dover at what is now called Delaware State University. We got initiated into doing this program because of the Biggs Museum's participation in what's called the citywide Black History Month celebration. So this is the first of several years, or excuse me, we've been working with the citywide celebration for many years. And the organizers of the celebration were interested in sort of focusing on the Tuskegee Airmen this year. Last year, we had focused very heavily on segregated schools of Delaware. And in years past, we had done sort of juried and unjuried artist exhibitions, sort of like, artists from the community. We had done an exhibition on collections of African and African-American artworks within Kent County, Delaware. So we were just, it's really kind of all over the place. And we really love sort of like exploring really this sort of, this historically underserved population. And I'm really, really glad that they picked the Tuskegee Airmen because it's just such a lush history, and it's such a lush set of images. They're so, they're so dashing. So the image that we're looking at right now is of a pilot named Edward Gleed. This is, and all of these images were taken in March of 1945. From what I understand, Toni Frissell was with the Tuskegee Airmen for just a short while, I think maybe a couple of days, but there are a pretty good cache of photos. And as you see in this photograph, Edward Gleed, this is not a, this is not necessarily meant to be sort of a casual photograph. This is kind of a formal photograph. We have the plane directly behind him. He's completely suited up, like he's ready to roll. And he is cutting quite a figure, you know what I mean? I think it's interesting that so many of the pilots wore mustaches, which I just, because I'm wearing one myself, it makes me feel like a pilot, but it's just interesting how fashionable this prototype, the stereotype basically of an American flyer was, and how pervasive it was throughout all of these groups of individuals. So the Tuskegee Airmen were made up of 2 regiments. One is called the 332nd Expeditionary Operations Group and the 477th Bombardment Group. And the Tuskegee, the expeditionary forces were basically fighter pilots that ran alongside the bombers. And so it was this 2-part sort of partnership from Italy and other places that would then fly into occupied parts of Europe and bomb individuals and protect those bombers from German fighters. It turns out the Tuskegee Airmen have really sort of an exceptional history of working within the military, and I have to admit I'm completely not a military historian whatsoever. I'm completely going to kill this history, but upon review, upon sort of noting what they were able to achieve as a group of pilots, they were able to down several German forces, and more importantly, to protect the bombers that they were escorting into occupied European areas. So the series is sort of designated, or was originally designated, as the Black Fighter Pilot Series. And then sort of we have other sort of references, because at the time, oh, hi, you're here. At the time, they were not called Tuskegee Airmen. That was actually an expression that was given to them much, much later, I believe after the 1970s. But there was a Black pilot program. One of the things that I want to sort of point in, and maybe we can move this camera a little bit further, you have Colonel Benjamin O. Davis here, who at the time in 1945, he was basically the sort of commanding officer of this group of individuals, as best as I can tell. And here he is with Edward Gleed again. So we're going to back up and we're going to move down this direction. These are some of my favorite images. I mean, I have lots of favorite images in this photograph, but or in this group of photographs, but I love the photographs of just the range of individuals that were involved. So so this is sort of like a briefing meeting, like they're being told about their next assignments, they're being told about the projects that they have to sort of engage in within the near future. And you just see the sort of sea of faces in these rooms. And of course, everybody got mustaches, again, very fashionable. But it just sort of speaks to, no one particular individual is sort of like pinpointed. There aren't any sort of like specific individuals that are noted about these individual photographs, but you just get this kind of everyman sort of feel to the photographs. Like they come from all walks of life. They came from literally all over the country. There were a few thousand individuals involved within the Tuskegee program. There were even individuals who had come from the Caribbean. So I believe that there were 3 Caribbean individuals that engaged within the Tuskegee program. And while many were a part of the program as long as the war was on, many of these individuals also stayed in the military afterwards and went on to have extremely successful military careers, some well into the 70s, 1980s. And you have not only sort of a group of firsts here, in terms of the first pilots, the first sort of African Americans associated with those pilots and supported those pilots. But you then see individuals going on from this and becoming first generals, first commanding officers, first individuals to work in integrating the military in the upcoming years after World War II is over with. So these photographs really, I think, just sort of speak to this idea of everyman, and at the same time, you are just sort of reminded of their youth. Everybody here is so young, they're so delicate, they're boys. I mean, they really are just children, and it's amazing to think about the societal pressure that they were under, the pressure that they were under to succeed perhaps better than anybody else is succeeding at this point. And at the same time, some of them are like in their teenage years, early 20s. It's just remarkable the achievement that they were able to, or what it is that they were able to achieve. I just want to stop for a second and see if they have any sort of preliminary questions. You're more than welcome to ask questions at any time during the lecture. But if you have any, this might be sort of a moment to sort of reflect, take it in. In the meantime, I'm going to turn us around and move to the other side of the galleries. Some little whiplash camera action. You're flying through the room. Okay, so if I had to actually choose a favorite, these are my favorite. So these are contact images. These are photographed larger than they normally would have been. They're usually just very, very small sort of images that you would look under magnification to try and get an idea as a photographer, which are your most successful images, what's most in view, what has the fewest blemishes. And then presumably the photographer made these notations on the individual pieces about pieces that she likes small, pieces that she likes larger. Sometimes she's identifying individual people within the photographs. And I just, I don't know, I love that that you are reminded that these are manufactured images, that these are, you know, it wasn't like everybody was just sort of hanging out in front of a plane that day, like everybody's there on assignment to be photographed. And to me, it's sort of interesting. At the end of the war, the Black Fighter program was, well, literally it was ignored publicly. These photographs never made it into public press, apart from a few Black newspapers, so Black-owned newspapers that are sort of that are pinpointed towards largely Black readership. Very few of these images were ever published, or any images of the Tuskegee Airmen were ever published. There is, at the time, in 1944, 1945, 1946, there is almost no mention of the Black Fighter program anywhere, whether it be sort of official government or, again, just sort of public press. Many other parts of the US military forces were being lauded, and there were great parades, and there were all sorts of wonderful kind of like homecoming experiences for a lot of individuals. And from what I understand, the reception of the Black Pilot program was silenced back home. And so the fact that that information about this vitally important social program within the US military, this experiment, was kind of suppressed, is interesting to me. That these images exist where someone is deliberately making pictures celebrating their accomplishments and who they are as people. So there is this kind of, this sort of, this bizarre sort of cross happening between intent and application between these images that I am fascinated by. And at the same time, just grateful to the fact that we had these images to look back on and to see that sense of contrast in terms of, you know, visual art making or of picture making.
Ryan, we have a comment over here that I would like to see if you have any extra information on.
Okay.
Someone has noticed that in these pictures that you're looking at right now, they are labeled as colored pilots.
Yeah.
Can you speak to whether or not that was referencing just the verbiage of the time period or specifically referencing the group before they were known as Tuskegee? Any comments?
I think that they were probably, so you're talking about the ET-330 colored flyers as well as the E-1320 colored fighters briefing. So yeah, this is definitely, these are definitely tags of the time period when these photographs were being processed. We certainly didn't add it. And they are part of the actual visual scan that is in the Library of Congress. So nothing here has been edited from or excluded basically from that. This is the language that was being used to describe this group of images at the time. And again, the idea of associating this group of flyers with the Tuskegee University, or what would eventually become Tuskegee University, but with the Tuskegee flight program and the set of lessons that happened out of Tuskegee and Morton Field, to name them Tuskegee was much, much later. It was probably 30 years after these photographs were taken. Great question. I hope I answered it appropriately. If I don't, please call me out on it. So we're just going to move down the way here a little bit further. So something I wanted to sort of bring to your attention. So the Citywide Black History Month celebration is happening in a couple of different locations throughout downtown Dover. And the Citywide Black History celebration really tries to focus on the the cultural implications, or the sort of cultural importance that that African Americans have given. But we really distinctly try to focus very heavily upon those contributions that came from Kent County, from the center of the state, from the county that holds the capital city of Dover. And so while we do sort of stray out into further Delaware and the Delmarva Peninsula, dependent upon the project that we're sort of emphasizing every year, Kent County is always sort of the home to this project. And here in Dover, there are a couple of different sort of initiatives that are taking place, or a couple of sort of partners. First, Delaware State News is one of our big sort of communication partners. They're actually sort of the organizer in many ways for the Citywide Black History Month celebration. And so much of the information that's happening all month long, including the exhibition and the programs that we have here, are highlighted in their sort of special website around the Citywide Black History Month celebration. We are lending some of these photographs on Saturday to the Sankofa Center in downtown Dover. So groups of individuals associated with the Tuskegee Airmen sort of memorial group here in Dover are putting together a display at Sankofa that will talk about the Tuskegee Airmen and sort of the implications, also talking about the sort of Kent County and Delaware, Dell State University connection to Tuskegee, which is so exciting for us. But one of the big storylines that they're sort of emphasizing at Sankofa this year was to talk not necessarily just about the pilots and about the generals and about the individuals that were sort of the big, most photographed or most sort of recognized figures, but really a lot of the anonymous individuals, the individuals that were working in communications, the ones that were working in mechanics, those individuals that would stand at the ready for the pilots to come back after these incredibly dangerous sort of programs or assignments that they would be sent on. And so they really wanted to sort of emphasize the breadth of the Tuskegee program. And so we are lending out a lot of our images for their one-day tour, basically, of the Sankofa Center. They've set it up, like so many, because it's COVID, they've set it up so that you are able to make a sort of distanced move through the histories that they're sharing. And we are really grateful for the opportunity to sort of throw in these photographs with it. So if you come, you should definitely come see these see this exhibition, see these individual photographs close up. But if you want to also see them within a sort of another very interesting context, you should check out what's happening at the Sankofa Center on Saturday. I do think they're taking reservations. It's always a good idea to have reservations right now because of COVID, but check it out. All that information is at Del State University. I should also do a plug that the Dover Federal Credit Union and Chesapeake Utilities are major sponsors of this program. So that said, we have, I know that was totally shameless, but so again, we have back to these sort of images of not necessarily the pilots, but individuals that aren't always easily recognized, individuals that are not always sort of pictured. This is a truly sort of stunning image and one that we use quite a bit in our marketing because you have the propellers, which are fantastic. I love the wear and tear on the sort of painted surface of the plane, but to have the workmen here as well as sitting on the wing in the distance in these very sort of flat Italian landscapes, there's something there's just sort of something dreamy about the entire thing. I really, really dig it. Again, I think it sort of also reinforces this notion that these are manufactured images. These are, you know, nobody was just sort of hanging out on top of an airplane with a screwdriver, you know, just there. But these are meant to, these are kind of stylized representations of the work that it took to support this whole sort of fighting endeavor. This is an example of an individual who has been recognized. This is Sergeant William P. Bostick in the control tower. He was a Michigan native. He lived in Ann Arbor during World War II with his parents. He enlisted in the Army Air Corps in 1940 and became a sergeant with the Tuskegee Airmen. He served both in Europe as well as in the Pacific Theater. So I'm going to take you down to the last 4 images. See if I can stay out of the light. And again, these are images that again are sort of emphasizing sort of the support staff, the staff of individuals that are working in auto mechanics, that are packing parachutes, that are supplying, you know, just, gas or loading up ammunition. All of those functions that that make for the sort of that make for the success of this group. One of the things that I'm especially sort of drawn to is also the kind of, I don't want to call it graffiti, but almost sort of like these sort of additions, the sort of decorative additions that are placed on the planes. One of the things that I would love to have been able to sort of see are these planes in color. I know that some of these planes have been sort of restored. There are examples of them in museums, but you might have this chance to sort of see if we can sort of get close up on it. These little forms of decoration that have been added to the sides of the plane, like state. Here in the corner or off in the distance, you see Tootsie, one of my personal favorites. There's something here, I forget if it's called Dreamer's Cream or something along those lines. You'll have to sort of inspect the images for it. But there's also sort of like this evocation of sort of a female form across the plane, bumper stickers, little bits of extra sort of ephemera, sort of like these sort of touching little like additions that were placed on the surface, whether to sort of boost courage or whether to sort of add your own sort of personalization to a plane that maybe you have a pretty intimate relationship with. Who can say really, but there's this level of personalization that is really very sweet. And one of the things that should be pointed out is that these planes, artistically speaking, were sort of they were recognized. The tail end of the planes, or I guess the second set of planes that they were operating with towards the end of the war, were painted bright red across the back end of the plane. And I forget what they were called, sort of the Crimson Angels or something. I forget what it's called, but they had sort of a special name, and they were noted because of the sort of red accenting that they placed within the plane. So it's interesting to me that there's this sort of, we're always sort of like so drawn to the images of the pilots, and sort of the idea that we're drawn to these sort of images of pilots, and we're drawn to the images of like the flight suits and the boots and all that. But we're also, I think, as a people, really drawn to the design of airplanes, generally speaking, and how the the red tails, thank you. I couldn't read for a second. They were known as the red tails. And you had a sigh of relief when you saw the red tails in the sky. And so again, these sort of dashing figures, but we were really, really drawn to the designs of airplanes, generally speaking. They were really, really, during the war effort, during the Second World War and the years after, the design of these planes was incredibly influential on commercial goods and sort of interior decorating, and like the lines were sort of lent to so many different things. But at the time, I love that there was like this sort of this extra layer of artistry that was placed upon the surface of these things, and to sort of personalize them and to create this kind of specialized kind of story about them. And it's pretty terrific stuff. So again, ask me some more questions if you have them. In the meantime, I'm just going to jump behind the camera myself and get a little bit closer to some of these photographs.
Hi, Brian. We have a question here about the location of these photographs. Do you know where exactly in Italy these photos were taken?
I do. Give me 1 second. I'm going to look back through my notes. Ramatelli, Italy. And I don't know where that is, unfortunately. But it seems like it was pretty strategic.
Hi, Brian. We have another question coming in. Do we know if any of the photos in this collection that we have up here at the Bigs depicts Delawareans?
Not to my knowledge. We haven't come across anyone. The few individuals that I've been able to identify really do come from across the country, though. So there were notes about individuals from the Midwest, I think from the Pacific Northwest, as well as from the East Coast. So Washington, D.C., New York, Michigan. I think there was someone from Chicago, and I want to say there was someone from Washington State. But like I said before, there were Tuskegee Airmen from all over the United States involved with the program, as well as the Caribbean, and perhaps even Canada, now that I'm thinking about it. So it really was an effort from across North America.
Hi, Ryan. We have another question that had come in. You had mentioned early on in the beginning that there were a group of photographers that were used by the Red Cross who traveled out in World War II and took pictures of not just the Tuskegee Airmen, but military personnel during that time. Do we know of any other photographers other than Toni Frissell, or was she the main one?
I don't even think that she was the main one. I mean, she is probably best remembered because of her association with the Tuskegee Airmen and this particular assignment, although there are other, she produced a lot of images during that time. Margaret Berkey White, I think, is probably the best female photojournalist of World War II, but there were dozens of men that were also involved with the project. I had real success in being able to do simple Google searches to be able to find the names of those war correspondents that were active in Europe in the 1940s. And so there are terrific, and what's really, really terrific about that is that all of these photographers had lives before and after the war. So even though many of them were volunteered and conscripted to be a part of this war effort, they all had these bigger careers, and many of them also sort of blend over into the fine arts, which is, as well as the commercial arts, which is just really exciting to sort of see that sense of continuity.
Hi, Ryan. We have two more questions coming in. First, I'll jump to a question with Toni Frissell. Do we know if she remained in contact with any of these airmen that she was photographing after the war?
I don't know the answer to that. That would be a really, really interesting question to ask. She lived until 1988, so she definitely would have seen the sort of, she probably would have been knowledgeable about the sort of reawakening of the images that she produced in the 40s, because these images got a new life basically in the 1970s when many of the Tuskegee Airmen themselves, who had had long and illustrious careers in the US military, pushed for better recognition about the importance of this group. And one of the things that I should point out is that the Tuskegee program became a major sort of, a major point of push to integrate our society. So when people were talking about integration, when we were talking about and then afterwards, when we were talking about equal rights in the 50s and then in the 1960s, the Tuskegee Project and the importance and the support that it received by military and government leaders, both Black and white within America, it was pointed out as an important push, or sort of, it was, people talked about the Tuskegee Airmen in relation to the need to integrate society, in the need to create equal rights. And so it became a powerful symbol and was communicated as a powerful symbol towards equality in the United States in the years that continued. So I would imagine, as the producer of these images, she was probably pretty thrilled. I would be super thrilled with it, the way that, you know, sometimes the images are reinvented for new purposes.
Hi, Ryan. We have another question that has come in about specifically the Delawareans. Do you know if we have at the Bigs or through the citywide Black History Month celebration, if we have a specific list of the Delawareans who served with the Tuskegee Airmen?
I believe that that information is part of the Sankofa project. So I don't have that information, and I'm glad I don't, because I don't want to spoil it. But the research that was done to create the display at the Sankofa Center focuses not only on the sort of breadth of support services that were present in Tuskegee Airmen, but it also talks pretty heavily about the Dover connection. Interestingly, on the campus of Del State University, just outside of I think it's the Jason Library building, they are considering on raising money for a Tuskegee monument that talks not only about sort of the importance of the Tuskegee Airmen within Black culture, but also, and within American culture, really. But they are also, part of that monument is supposed to be dedicated specifically to the Delawareans that served. So they are using those names as ways of sort of bolstering this overall memorial within Del State University. And I really hope that they're able to accomplish that.
Thanks, Ryan. You spoke a little bit about this and alluded to it a little bit in your answer to the Toni Frissell keeping in touch with the airmen. We had a question / observation about an interesting follow-up to this. Would be to learn about the Tuskegee Airmen's transition back to life after the war and the racism that was still prevalent in the American society at that time. I'm going to jump into this as well. That would be to this person and everyone. That would be a wonderful question to ask when we have an original Tuskegee Airman speaking with us on the 16th. But furthermore from that, so join us on the 16th, ask it to someone who was there. But also, Ryan, in your research for this and the research of the photographs and how they were used afterwards, can you speak to this at all? Do you come across any information that discussed sort of how these images were used in response to the Tuskegee Airmen coming back from war and the life that they had?
I think that the best way of sort of describing their use in the 1940s at the absolute end of the war was that the images were ignored, as were the airmen themselves. They were not publicly celebrated. And I think that a lot of people would easily argue that they were excluded from those celebrations that did exist. And I think that this was the treatment of lots of individuals of color who served during the war. I think, I don't even know what I think, but well, I know exactly what I think, but I don't think that I should say it. I don't know that I have to, but how do I, the airmen, from what I understand, and again, there are lots of individuals out there who have given eyewitness accounts to this, that have talked about this in their own biography. And you certainly don't need to hear this from me, but Black participation in World War II kicked into gear an all new set of horrors in the Jim Crow era. And so people came back to horrific treatment in the States after having served their country. People had to hide their military uniforms. They had to hide their participation within the military service. They had to play down their accomplishments and not speak of it. They had to they had to find jobs in the States that they were patently overqualified for. And they were experiencing a sharp contrast between the treatment that they received as victors in Europe, in a place where they did not have the same kind of racism that they then found when they returned to the States. So the promise of a social, the ability for a people to climb, the promise of that was hoped for by their participation in the war, as I'm sure that they had probably hoped for in every war that they had participated in, which is all of the American wars, never materialized. But it did help but their participation did help to push along equal rights and integration across the 1950s and 1960s.
Thank you so much for expanding on that, Ryan. We have a question that's a bit of a really hard transition from that one. Back to the photography and the artistic practices of the photography. Our next question that came in is about Toni Frissell's history in fashion photography. You spoke about using the fisheye lens and how that elongated different portions of the human anatomy. Do you see or can you show us sort of how that is playing into her photographs of the Tuskegee Airmen?
I wondered that myself, and I was looking for it because I had looked up sort of like, just like some basic essays about some of her work in fashion. And there have been writers that have done a little bit of research on her work in fashion because she was a bit of a trailblazer, especially in terms of like the first the bathing suits and things of that nature. But I did not see those techniques operating here. And while these are stylized representations of the airmen, I don't think that they're meant to be optically stylized. I don't think that they're meant to be sort of overly beautified. I think they're supposed to be glamorous, but I don't think that they're supposed to be sort of physically idealized in that same way. They're not selling bathing suits. But so that said, you should totally get on the web and find some of the images. Toni Frissell, she's well documented on web, and you'll be able to find some very, very decent photographs of her work. Some of them are really, really beautiful and cinematic, just really cinematic. We have time for one more question. I didn't even think it was going to be a full hour, but we're close. See my paint? We got nothing. I thought somebody might ask if she was actually dating JFK during the wedding. I don't know. I really don't know.
Hi, Ryan. We have one more question that has come in. All of these photographs that we have are black and white. Was there color photography during this time period that was going out to publications?
There's been color photography, I want to say that since the late 1800s. So there were processes that would create color photography. There was not a lot of color printing in newspapers and magazines at this time. So, and what was there was somewhat limited to covers and sometimes sort of like center images and things of that nature. So black and white photography was really, you're going to find a lot more of black and white photography during this time frame for sure.
Thank you, Brian. We have one more question that has come in. You've shown us a relatively small collection of photographs of the Tuskegee Airmen. Are these all that she took? Or is this just a selection of a larger collection of her photographs?
So when I was doing the work, when I was looking at the images that were available through the Library of Congress, I downloaded probably about twice as many images as this, just that I would have choices and I'd be able to sort of figure out, you sort of lay them out on the floor and you figure out what groupings you want to do and such. And I did not download all of them. So there are quite a few that are available at the Library of Congress site. And a lot of images that you probably never would have seen. Some of my favorite images that I wasn't able to include here were pictures of the airmen in card games and sort of like in a slightly more relaxed, sort of casual atmosphere. Similar to those sort of the briefing pictures that we saw, where it sort of emphasizes the everyman sort of character of the Tuskegee Airmen. At the same time, this is kind of, sort of, there's a playfulness about it that is sort of hinted at in other pictures, but it was, really came home in these slightly more candid photos. So I would really encourage you, go to the Library of Congress database, type in, or even just type in Toni Frissell Library of Congress, and it'll start taking you directly to those pages. And you'll have fun. You'll have a lot of fun taking a look at these things. Like I said, download them, share them, put them out onto Facebook, use them on social media, give the Library of Congress credit wherever you do, but share these images because they're really worth it. I think that we're done, right? So if you, I think that we can sort of put my email into the chat box. If you want to take it, you're more than welcome to. It's rgrover@bigsmuseum.org. So if you have any further questions, feel free to give me a ring or email. Like I said, if there are any images here that you're really interested in getting copies of, I might be able to send something out. So you're more than welcome. But again, check out the Library of Congress. It's open to anybody, not just smart aleck curators. And I hope you enjoy this. I hope to see you down here at the museum. I really hope to see you at the Sankofa Center. Get reservations. And yeah, have fun. Bye.